All right, so we're going to begin. We're going to continue with these stories that explain the destruction of the various rebellions. I want to point out, I guess I didn't last time, is that these texts are referring to two rebellions. There's the rebellion in the year 70, which led to the destruction of the temple, and that's primarily in the story that we didn't read, where Yochanan ben Zakkai sneaks out of Jerusalem. So we're not reading that story. These other stories have a mix of that rebellion, and then there's the Bar Kokhba rebellion. The Bar Kokhba rebellion was about 65 years later, and also just ended in a tremendous loss, catastrophic loss. So the rabbis in the Talmud often just combine those two rebellions as the rebellions against Rome. They really were kind of in the same way, World War I and World War II. World War II is kind of a continuation of World War I and a lot of the similar issues. So these were just the rebellion, the season of rebellion, the era of rebellion against Rome. It ended with the Bar Kokhba rebellion, and the Jews had no power whatsoever. And Jewish sovereignty was really lost in 70, but it was the nail was shut on the coffin in the Bar Kokhba rebellion. So these stories, which never mention Bar Kokhba, never mention the word rebellion. I mean, they have rebellion, but there's very little politics in the stories. But historically, they're referring to both rebellions. For instance, the story about Beitar takes place in the Bar Kokhba rebellion, and a lot of the great slaughters. Well, it took place during both wars, but a lot also took place during the Bar Kokhba rebellion, where the Romans were particularly aggressive and wicked and trying to teach a lesson. All right, we finished the first one. We're not going to go back to it. If you're curious, this Shabbat services, we're going to look at that in more detail. The first story about Bar Kamsa, but we're done with it here. So we're going to go to the second story.
Can you just say a word about it? So what take-home message for us? I know we've talked about how the trivial things cause rebellion, but does that mean that life is trivial, or does it mean that if we only change the trivial matter, things would change? What's the take-home?
Well, that's going to come up again, because the issue of a trivial matter causing a great war is the theme of all these stories. So we'll talk about it again. But, I mean, I don't know. I don't know that you have to be a great Talmud head to come to those conclusions. I don't know if people read. I was very interested in Barbara Tuchman at some point in my life. Mm-hmm. I was reading a lot of her books. Now, I wasn't a history major, but Barbara Tuchman's a popular historian. So she wrote this book, two books that were influential for me. One is The Guns of August. Guns of August, also, by the way, very important to John Kennedy. I don't know if people know that. The lore is that he had just read it before the Cuban Missile Crisis. So the point of The Guns of August is about World War I, the origins of World War I. And she felt that you had this big systemic setup that had the powers arrayed against each other. So it only took a little spark. The little spark was the assassination, right? So if you're a history buff, you know what I'm talking about. If not, you're totally lost. But there was this just one little assassination caused the whole world to convulse in this war that lasted a long time and then spilled over into World War II. And so her point was that once you had the forces arrayed, all it took was a little insult, assassination's a big deal, but it's one guy, and it leads to hundreds of millions of people being killed. So that's kind of what the rabbis are saying here too. They don't go into the forces that are arrayed, like the inevitability in the systems of Rome against the Jews. But that's kind of the life they lived with, I suppose. And so they were saying one little thing, one little spark could cause it. I think that the greater spiritual message is that you have to watch the little things in your life. That maybe they're more significant than you think, and in the sense of what you can control. And here's I don't think this is a controversial statement, although people take offense when I say it anyway, so here you go. We really don't control very much in our lives. We think that we do. What we particularly don't control very well is international politics. And I know this is a sensitive thing to talk about right now, but the fact is we have very little influence. The people that are, some of it, there's exceptions, and God bless them. I'm glad they're working at it, but most of us have very little influence on the Iran deal, the international politics, and how we just don't. We're not, these decisions are going to be made because of historical forces, because of powerful people, because of lobbying interests. There's all sorts of people that come in line before the ordinary citizen raises his hand and says, hey, here's what I think. So, and I think the rabbis were aware of that too. Now, if that's true in a democracy, That's certainly true in the era before there were democracies, where the ordinary citizen had very little control over international politics. So the rabbis were really trying to say, what do you have control over? And understand that that's significant too. So you have control over your family, your relationships, your community, the way you talk to each other. That previous story we had was about humiliating a guy at a party. You have control over that. And you don't know how that's going to snowball and create some kind of tragic disaster. So I think that's partly what the rabbis are getting into with these stories. All right. So I'm going to do what I did before. Is I'm going to read the Hebrew, and you can follow in the Hebrew or the English. I should say Aramaic. It's Aramaic. So it's on the second. The English is on the second page, through a cock and a hen, and the Hebrew is on the top of the next page. Okay, everybody got it? All right. Atarnagola va'atarnagolta chariv tur malka. So it's interesting because the Aramaic there is a lot more sharp than the English, but a tarnagol, the Aramaic is tarnagola. So tarnagol is a common Hebrew word. Tarnagola is the Aramaic, but a chicken. I'm sorry, no, tarnagol is a rooster. Yeah, and that's the male, and the female is tarnagolta. Just by adding, like in Hebrew, if you add a hey to a noun, very often you get a female version of it. In Aramaic, if you add a taf, you get a female version. So the female version of rooster is chicken. So because of a rooster and a chicken, Chariv Tur Malka, the city of Tur Malka, was killed, was destroyed. You'll see a lot of people were massacred as we go through the whole story. And again, that's the theme. You know, if you had Kamsa and Bar Kamsa in the previous story, and remember I told you it's a play on words. It's the names of two people, but Kometz means a very little thing. So that first story is giving away the theme altogether. Because of a very little thing, Jerusalem was destroyed. So this is Tur Malka, another Jewish city, and it's just a chicken and a rooster. That's it, just because of a chicken and a rooster. Chariv Tur Malka. Tahave Nehige, because it was a custom. Ki havu mafke chatna v'kalta. So when there was a chatan and a kala, there was a bride and a groom. So whenever there was a marriage, mafke kamayu tarnagola v'tarnagolta. During the wedding procession, they would march in front of them a chicken and a rooster. Lovely, right? We don't do that anymore. I mean, I had a wedding on Sunday. I have another wedding. I don't know. I haven't told the bride and groom to make sure to bring a chicken and a rooster. Yeah. I think there's all sorts of problems doing it nowadays.
You have a fresh dinner.
Yeah, right, exactly. First they march, and then. But anyway, we don't do that anymore. You bring your marriage license and your ketubah, but you leave the chickens at home. But in those days they did. They had a chicken and a rooster. Klomar, and now they explain the symbolism. Peru or vu katarnagolim. So it was a symbol that you should have children, be fruitful and multiply, like chickens. Chickens have lots of children. All right, so that was the custom. Yom Achada, Havi Khalif Gunda Durmai. All right, so a column of Roman soldiers were passing by. It's very important. This context is that this city, like many of the Judean cities, was under occupation. So occasionally you would see Roman soldiers. It wasn't anything unusual. They were patrolling the city. What was unusual was that they're occupiers. They're Romans, and we're Jews, and they don't understand our customs. I mean, it's bad enough that they're occupying us, which we don't like. I mean, some of us hate it. Some of us learn to live with it. Some of us don't care that much, but they're not Jews, and they're foreigners. And so in the ancient world, maybe that was fairly common. It doesn't mean that it was accepted in the ancient world. Nobody likes to be occupied by a foreign army. So there's these Romans, and they're seeing these chickens. Shalkainu mine, and they decide, hey, here's some chickens. They don't know what's going on. They just think there's some chickens, and they're hungry, and they want the eggs or they want the chickens. So they take the chickens from. They don't realize what they're doing. That's important to understand. It was a misunderstanding. They don't know what they're doing, and they take the chickens. And the people in the wedding party think it's an aggressive act. They assume it's an aggressive act, and maybe some of them are a little hot-headed and don't like the Romans that much anyway. Now, so they jump on the Roman soldiers and they start beating them. Okay, I want to point out in the previous story we had something similar, which a cultural misunderstanding, which was central to the story. So you remember there was the little defect in the cow,
Right.
And the storyteller is very clear in saying this was a defect for Jews but not for Romans. Romans have their own set of defects. We have our own set of defects. When cultures encounter each other and they don't know that much about her, there is a strong potential for misunderstanding. And if there's already tension in the relationship, which there certainly was between the Romans and the Jews, then that misunderstanding could lead to violent results. So now you have it here again as the primary cause of the slaughter that's going to follow is a cultural misunderstanding. For the Romans, it was his chickens right down the road. We can take those. For the Jews, it was a part of a sacred ceremony of binding two people together, a very, very important wedding ceremony. So you have that misunderstanding. The Romans take the chickens, and the Jews respond violently. Okay, and then what happens? Atu amar le Caesar, mardu bachi udai. So then they tell Caesar, they have this open relationship with the Roman emperor, and say, the Jews are rebelling against you. Okay, and atu alayim. And so then Rome marches, and that's the end of not just Tor Malka, but Jewish independence. It's the end of it's a terrible massacre. Yeah. So we actually could stop the story there. Because that's the main point of the story. I shouldn't say it's a main point. We're going to keep reading. There's a very interesting sort of epilogue to it, which we'll read, which introduces a character that seems to be very much like Bar Kokhba, which may or may not be Bar Kokhba. Yeah.
I wonder if anyone has gone up to these people and said, why did you jump on them?
Yeah. Yes, for sure. I think, as the rabbis are reflecting back, remember these stories were written hundreds of years after they happened. So, it's remarkably free of blame, at least up to here. Or let's say it's not free of blame, lots of blame to go around. The Romans should have been more careful that before you start taking people's chickens, understand why they're there. Ask them, look around a little bit more, open your eyes more widely. But there's also, why are you jumping on Roman soldiers? Like, you don't understand the consequence of jumping on Roman soldiers? So it seems, I think a fair reading of the story is that both parties seem foolish. And that's important too. It's very interesting too that the rabbis would be objective about it. They're neither blaming the Romans fully, nor are they blaming the Jews fully, but they're analyzing it objectively as really a case of cultural misunderstanding, which snowballed into major tragedy. Now, as the story continues, we see terrible cruelty from the Romans, and the Jews are clearly blaming the Romans for that. But the spark that lit the fire of rebellion, they see it, as being a result of both of miscalculations and misunderstandings of both sides.
And when you have tension between two groups of people, it doesn't take much to ignite.
Right.
So we've seen it over and over and over everywhere.
Right. Every one of these stories is a cautionary tale. Everything that goes wrong is meant to teach us something in the future, because we're going, they're understanding we're going to face similar circumstances in the future.
Yeah.
And how can we be smarter? How can human beings be smarter in handling these things? So
human nature catches up with it.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, you can think of a million examples. From Israel today.
Yeah.
Israel and the Palestinians is Israel and the Palestinians, despite the fact that we've lived together for all these years, there's still profound cultural differences which get us in trouble. The people are very, very different. The Palestinian culture is very different from Israeli culture, and it leads to misunderstandings, even under the best of circumstances and goodwill on both sides. And I would say Roman and Jewish were very, very different. But even in America, you've got lots of little subcultures in America. So police culture, right, is one thing. Yes, come on. Yeah, these are tense situations where there's a little spark and suddenly, we're lucky. I shouldn't say we're lucky. And suddenly there's tanks in the street, in Ferguson. So anyway, all right. Anyhow, have behu bar daroma. So at the time there was a guy named Bar Daroma. So not Bar Kokhba, but Bar Daroma, and somebody who seems to be like a charismatic fighter who single-handedly is winning the war here. Daroma, of course, just means from the south.
He could jump a mile.
Yeah, he's from the south. Yeah, all right.
From the south or from home.
Oh, yeah, it's interesting. I never think of that. I didn't think of that. Yeah, you got the word Roman there. Yeah, never thought of that. Yeah, the guy from the south. I don't remember where Bar Kokhba's from exactly. I don't think he's from the south. There may have been more than one Bar Kokhba type. I'm assuming the prototype here is Bar Kokhba, but there could have been some other generals that were charismatic and Josephus that later get the people in trouble. Anyway, the rabbis had a very poor sense of, they didn't like Bar Kokhba. Bar Kokhba, this is part of, I've talked about this before, how Jewish identity and Jewish consciousness changes, and these characters which were sort of mediocre or even lean towards people we disapproved of in the Talmud suddenly became great heroes. And Bar Kokhba was an example. When I was at camp, Bar Kokhba was the great Jewish hero, whereas in the Talmud he's not. He actually led the people into disaster and catastrophe, and Yochanan ben Zakkai was much more of a hero. So this is kind of how things change. Anyway, so you have Bar Darova.
How big a following did Bar Kokhba have? Was there any estimate of that?
So I don't know. You're asking me as an historian. My feeling, what I've learned is that he had a big following. That the rebellion against Rome was really popular, but it wasn't unanimously supported. Just like the American Revolution was unanimously supported. But and it's easy in retrospect, of course, because it turned into a disaster, and the rabbis are more immediately in retrospect than we are. So for the rabbis, it was Bar Kokhba that ruined everything. It just turned the Romans totally against us. So they didn't like him that much. Anyway, so Bar Daroma, Dehave Kafitz Mila, he could jump for a mile. Vikatil Behu, and slaughter people along the way. It's superhuman powers. Able to leap tall buildings at a single go. So now suddenly the Roman emperor again is a character in the story. Shakle Caesar litage. Caesar took off his crown. V'otve a'ara, sat on and put it on the ground. Now why he does that? I guess first of all he's preparing to daven, but he's going to take it off as a sign of humility, I think. And let's see what he does. In Amar, Ribono de Alma Kule. So he's talking to God, and he calls God Ribon HaOlam, Master of the Universe. He goes, Master of the Universe. So suddenly he becomes a Jew. Go figure. They suddenly portray the Roman emperors as worshiping in similar language the Jewish God, our God, the one true God. Why is that? We'll go back to it maybe if we have time. Now, here's what he says: which would be sort of ken yehi ratzon, like if it be your will. Lo timsarei lahu gavra lididei ulamachute biadei dechad gavra. Don't turn over my kingdom, this kingdom, into the hands of just this one guy. It's hard for me to really understand what this prayer is. I mean, first of all, he's saying, don't let me be defeated. But he adds to it, don't let me be defeated by this guy. But the emphasis seems to be, don't let me be defeated by this one guy. Like, it's not fair that I should be defeated by one guy. I can understand being defeated by a whole army, but you're going to let one guy defeat me?
No, I don't want to go by one guy. I want my son to stab me to death.
Yeah, I don't know. So
he must have sensed this groundswell as a function of this guy's inspiration.
Yeah.
And that's what he was fearful.
Yeah, he's the leader.
Yeah. Yeah. But somehow it feels like it's not fair that only one guy can defeat me.
Well,
You're going to let one guy defeat me? And he's praying to God. There's a lot of very interesting things. We don't have time to unpack everything. The Roman emperor is praying like a Jew.
Yeah.
And it's not so much that his prayer is answered. We'll see his prayer is not answered. And the rabbis make a big deal of saying the prayer is not answered. But I guess what's weird here is he's not an unsympathetic character. He's praying to God that he not be defeated. Something that we would all do. We would pray and say, let me pray for victory here. Anyway, look.
But it might be one guy means it's not a majority of the people who are rebelling. It's this
maybe
one
that's a good point.
person
Yeah,
who
yeah.
is the focus.
Right,
And
right.
Was he supported? I know.
Right.
Just left.
Right. Let's not let it be one person that decides the fates of our nations together.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Now it says Akashle Puma de Bar Daroma. But it wasn't this prayer that defeated Bar Daroma. It was his own mouth. Bar Daroma's own mouth. The Amar. We got to read between the lines a lot here to see what's going on. I'll help us do that. So Bar Daroma quotes Tehillim, Psalms, and says, Halo atah Elohim zenachtanu. You, God, have abandoned us. V'lo tetzei Elohim b'tzivotenu. And God is not going out with our armies. So that seems to be a bad thing to say. He's accusing God of abandoning us. It's blasphemy that God's abandoned us. Now, David Nami Amar Hachi, but wait a second, how could you call that blasphemy? First of all, it's in the Torah. I mean, quoting Tehillim, quoting Psalms is blasphemy. David wrote Tehillim, wrote Psalms, according to the rabbis, and are you going to accuse David also of blasphemy? So a lot of Hachi David. So this is what David means. Atmuhe kamatma. So David wasn't saying it specifically. David was wondering. He was wondering, did God abandon us? So David was expressing doubts as questions, whereas Bar Darama was saying explicitly, God has abandoned us. So already you learned something about that you can express doubts in Judaism, but you express them as questions, as uncertainty, as wondering. It's perfectly legitimate. A great religious leader like David does that. God, have you abandoned us? As soon as you turn it into blanket statements, that's
Abandoned us.
God's abandoned us. And I think the implication is Bar Darama is preaching this. So Bar Darama is saying, God's abandoned us. Forget about God. God's not going to save us. We have to save ourselves. And I feel like that's where you start to get the rabbi's sense of Bar Kochba as someone who really was an atheist or didn't rely on God at all. He was telling people, forget about religion, forget about God. Let's just protect ourselves the best we can. And the rabbis were objecting to that. And then someone says, well, wait, David seems to reject God. And I mean, he's quoting from Psalms. So they're saying very important difference, subtle but important, is that David's sensibility is, I'm wondering. I'm asking the question. And it's really, in Judaism, you're always allowed to ask the question.
Right.
You shouldn't really answer it, though, right away. So we don't know enough to answer it.
It's me, David.
Yeah. Are you there, God? It's me, David. Okay. Anyway, so the rabbis are saying that's what messed up Bar Darama. Precisely because God resented that so much. So here's what happened. And this is a lot of fateful events take place in bathrooms in the Talmud. So this takes place in a bathroom. Not sure why it has to take. They just tell us it took place in the bathroom.
The classic form of this.
Yeah. Al leveta kisei. He goes to the bathroom. Ata darkona. Terrible snake comes. Maybe snakes hang out in bathrooms. There's several stories with snakes in bathrooms in the Talmud. Anyway,
Darkona is not dragon?
no, darkona is snake.
Snake.
Yeah, snake. A big snake. I think, is it related to the word dragon? It might be actually, but it's I don't know if they were dragons in the Talmud, but anyhow, so there's a big snake, and you think the snake's going to bite him. It actually doesn't. It's shmatei lekarkasei. Out of fright, his innards collapsed, which is a way of saying he got so frightened, v'nach nashe, and he died. So he scared him to death. Literally, the snake scared him to death. His innards collapsed, which I think is a phrase. It just means he scared him to death, and that was the end of it. So as soon as Bar Darama dies, but it's not a very dignified way of dying either. So I think the storyteller is giving a little dig at Bar Darama. You guys think he was this great hero. In fact, he was scared to death by a snake, and so he.
in the bathroom.
Yeah, in the bathroom, right, which makes it even more undignified, with his pants down, probably, right? Yeah. So, all right. We'll keep going. I'm going to keep going. Amar. Now you have the Roman Emperor talking, and the Roman Emperor says, because of this nes gadol, this miracle happened to me. All right, this miracle happened to me, and their general collapses in the bathroom. Ha zimna ishvakina. So I'll let the Jews off. This is amazing. He really comes off as, I don't want to say a decent guy, but he doesn't seem like a villain, at least at this point. And he says, I'm going to let them off.
A God-fearing guy.
Yeah. Right. I said, well, God did this for me, so in return.
God-fearing than the
Yeah. Right. Shavkinu Vazal. So he lets the Jews off. I mean, he had marched against them, and he decided, okay, Bar Darama is dead, and God answered my prayer, so we're done. It's a truce. Okay. Now, another misunderstanding. Izdachor. V'achlu v'shatu, v'adli kesharge ad ichaze bilayona de gushpanka barachok mila. I'm going a little quicker so we can finish. But so they have a party. And the Jews have a party and they celebrate. They dance and sing, and they light torches, and you could see their lights from miles away, which appear to be a kind of royal symbol, a gushpanka. They don't translate this very well, by the way. A gushpanka is a royal symbol. And you can see it for miles, apparently all the way to Rome. It's pretty far away. So you could see the Jews celebrating, and somehow with their torches, unintentionally creating a kind of Roman seal. And the emperor takes it badly. Amar michdu machdu kamachdu bar Yehudai. The Jews are mocking me. The word chadu means a very sharp kind of sarcastic humor. So the Jews are mocking me. I let them go, and the Jews are mocking me. Hadar ata alayhu. So he comes and he changes his mind again, and he sends the armies against him. So it's the second misunderstanding, because the Jews are not mocking him. They're celebrating. And their celebrating is misunderstood by a very oversensitive emperor who decided it's because they're mocking me. So here he doesn't look so good, because he's taking it personally. He's going to wipe them out. And then Amar Rabbi Asi. So you have a rabbi who lives some 300 years later. He says, Tlat me alfe shlife saife, aile l'Tor Malka. 300,000 sword-bearing soldiers came to Tor Malka. V'katlu be tlata yoma v'tlata leluta. And they were slaughtering for 3 days and 3 nights. Uvahach gisa hilule v'change. One side of the town, they were still partying, because they hadn't got word yet what was happening before Twitter, before the internet, before Paul Revere even.
Didn't hear the screaming of death.
They didn't hear it. I mean, they were so oblivious. They were so drunk. They didn't hear it. Velo havayade bahan hane. The two sides, the side of slaughter and the other side, didn't hear each other. That's the end of the story. All right. So you have a lot of the similar themes. Really interesting story. Hard to know where to even start. But again, you've got that tiny little spark that sets off the whole war.
So two cultural